Hello. Welcome to the lesson on quantitative sampling procedures for COCO 709, Research Methodology and Counseling. This lesson will continue our exploration of the different parts of a research paper. We have already discussed the different parts of the introduction, including the statement of the problem, literature review, and development of the research hypotheses and questions. This lesson is going to focus on the method section. We're going to look at the participants, how they're collected, how we know how many to collect, and what are the inclusion and exclusion criteria for obtaining participants. This procedure is known as quantitative sampling. Quantitative sampling consists of two components. The first is the population. The population is defined as all individuals comprising a specified set of criteria. So for instance, all people who are part of the United States, citizens, or all students in the Hunter School of Education counseling programs. The second part of quantitative sampling is the sample, which is any subset of that population, which for instance will look like this. Because it's any subset of the population, a sample can be as large or as small as you want it to be. So for most studies in counseling, a sample of at least 150 people is typically desired. The purpose of sampling in quantitative research is representativeness. The question we're trying to answer is, does the sample adequately represent the population? This is also known as sample validity, and it is determined by the sampling procedure. The sampling procedures will be discussed in the next few videos on sampling. An example of sampling validity would be if you were conducting a survey about the opinions of counselors in the field, let's say this particular field. You might notice that most counselors identify as female for their gender. You do some more research and you find that, in fact, 75% of all counselors identify as female. Please note that I made this number up. However, for the purposes of this study, let's pretend that 75% of all counselors identify as female. Thus, the question is does your sample also have 75% of the population, or the sample identifying as female? If so, then you would have good sample validity, at least for the characteristic of gender. Of course, in the real world, sample validity is rarely achieved, but we try to get as close as possible as researchers. The next question for sampling is, who or what will you study? In terms of answering this, the first question to answer is, what is your unit of study? The unit of study is a very diverse or wide-ranging possibility. It can be an individual, it could be families, it could be schools, it could be different states, it could be different countries, it could be frogs with wearing tiny hats, it could be anything. But the important part is to determine what unit is your level of study. Most studies in counseling tend to look at individuals, but you will see families and schools from time to time as well. The next question for what will you study is, what are your inclusion and exclusion criteria? Inclusion criteria are those variables that must be present for the individuals to be included in your study. For instance, in a study about military veterans, perhaps you only want to study individuals who have experienced military combat. So therefore, you would only select those individuals that are veterans that have seen military combat. That would be considered inclusion criteria. For exclusion criteria, It is defined as those factors that might disrupt the conclusions you can draw from your sample. And so individuals with those characteristics are excluded from your study. So for instance, you might decide that you want to examine a sample or a population of individuals who have some sort of neurological impairment. And there are two broad kinds of neurological impairment, those that are congenital, meaning those that started from birth, and those that are acquired, meaning they are acquired after birth for some reason. And for whatever reason, you decide that it's important to understand how people have developed with once they acquire a brain injury. And so you would want to exclude people who have some sort of congenital brain injury. That would be an example of exclusion criteria. There are a number of different quantitative sampling types and two broad families of them. The two types of quantitative sampling are probabilistic and non-probabilistic. Probabilistic comes from the word probability and essentially can be defined as everyone has an equal selection or an equal chance of being selected into the sample. So all selection is done through some sort of chance or randomness. This probabilistic sampling allows an unbiased estimate because the researcher is not determining who gets to be part of the sample and who does not. So because of this, it's considered more rigorous. And as you can imagine, probabilistic sampling then has more sampling validity than non-probabilistic sampling methods. Non-probabilistic sampling, as you can imagine, is the opposite of probabilistic, in that selection is not done through randomness or chance, but instead is done through convenience or availability. For instance, in non-probabilistic sampling, you tend to just look at who's around, who's available to be part of the sample. Because this can lead to a biased sample, it has less sampling validity than probabilistic methods. Although probabilistic sampling is the preferred form of quantitative sampling, most studies, at least that I have seen, tend to use non-probabilistic methods in counseling and psychology. And that concludes this particular lesson. The next lesson will focus on the different types of quantitative sampling.